Good afternoon and welcome to Computer Vision this year. I'm very happy to meet you for the kickoff today, for which we have this online lecture. So, in the Computer Vision class this year, you will learn how to build computer vision systems, and you'll build real ones because there are projects for us to work on. And first, we have the theory part for the first couple of weeks. In today's lecture, I will motivate the class. We will discuss what computer vision is all about. We'll look at the organization of the course and we'll start with some of the content. I have seen that a lot of students have signed up in iLearn, like 160 students. We have some 70 students now in the Zoom session, and it would be good if most of you follow actually this live lecture, which we are recording, because if you attend the actual live lecture, that would be good. Ideally, you would turn off your camera because you will be filmed and recorded. So you can make any comment you wish, also orally here. If you don't want to be recorded, you would just send your questions or comments to the chat, and I'll be happy to address them this without calling your name. But maybe just keep your cameras off, otherwise you will be recorded. And I will quickly turn on my camera and say hi. I just need to switch to the right screen. So, hi everyone. But in order also to keep the video focused on the content, I will turn off my camera now and will focus on the slides and the audio. So, this course will cover computer vision, and we will start in this course with an introduction today. We will then look into pixels and filters, and step by step we will get to more higher level vision. So we're starting with simple pixels in images. Then we look at regions in images, we find features, and finally we want to recognize objects. And for this we can use, for example, convolutional neural networks. So far we'll then only have looked at static images, but there are also image sequences like videos. We'll see how we can process them. And then there are a couple of selected topics, and we will look a little bit into mobile robots because some of you may want to work on a robot vision project, but I'll say more about the projects later today. So that's our agenda. Probably right now, you don't get much out of this agenda, but as we progress with the course, you'll see the step by step. What you just need to get for now is we'll start with pixels and very low level operations are called filters. And then step by step, we'll move more into higher level vision and build more and more concepts on top of single pixel images. So what is computer vision about? Computer vision is a field that deals with how computers can gain an understanding from images or videos. And there are lots of different directions in computer vision. We will look a lot into modern computer vision, which is a lot based on statistical methods, in particular machine learning. We will also see some classical methods because for a lot of vision systems, you need to combine statistical methods with some more traditional methods, and we'll make it all the way up to convolutional neural networks and vision transformers for the high-end machine learning systems. And all of you deal with computer vision every single day. Say optical character recognition, in which vision systems recognize your handwriting. We have autonomous driving systems or advanced driving assistance systems that use a lot of computer vision. We have face recognition apps, and we use all of this all the time. So there are plenty of computer vision systems you deal with. And now I want to know from you if you have any suggestions, what kind of computer vision systems you deal with every day. If you have some applications, you can either turn on your mic and tell us this or send some comments to the chat about which computer vision applications or examples of computer vision you deal with every day or at least from time to time. So I'm happy to collect your input, either turn on your mic or send this here in the chat. And I'll wait a moment for some of the comments to come in. Face ID in your smartphone, yes, some type of face recognition. That's a good example of a vision system, and maybe we can collect some more input here. Security, cameras, advanced driving assistance systems, yes, like dead angle detection, for example, or pedestrian detection. Image search, so yes, you would put in an image in Google and then try to find URLs from where this image could be. If you scan documents, you would process them. For example, optical character recognition. You can use some filters on social media to augment your face, for example. I think all of those are great examples that you are mentioning. And in this course, we will see how these systems work and how we can actually build them. Now, what I like in all of my lectures, there's this very famous map of computer science that is popular on the internet, and I think it provides a very good overview about the field of computer science. And then what I always like to highlight are the areas that we're actually looking at in a specific class. So I've selected a few areas. So we're doing computer vision. We process images for that. We do machine learning as one solution, but we also use some other methods from AI. There are some applications to robotics, and we also need the proper hardware to run some of these models, for example, GPUs, which are graphics units. And then I always zoom in so you can see the relevant ones here. But this is what the course will be about. It's a computer vision course. We will use machine learning methods, not just machine learning methods, also some classical methods. We'll have applications in robotics, for example, and also see how we can use high-end hardware to train and run some of these models. So that's what the course is about. And what I want you is to learn AI, computer vision from that AI and machine learning perspective. We'll look into lots of theory in this course, which is the foundation of these applications, but then we will also see how we can build these applications and not just do theory, but build real stuff that works. And I want you to be able to apply that theory to real problems. And as there are new computer vision methods, I want you to have transferable skills to understand these new methods in the future and how to use them properly. Then we will also look at some current research problems and we'll get an understanding of how the field of computer vision may evolve in the coming years. Now, what skills do you need in order to take advantage of that course? You need a background, obviously, in mathematics. We'll use calculus, linear algebra, and statistics. You should know about algorithms and data structures because we're going to look into more complex algorithms, so you should know the foundations. And there will be a practical component in this course, so you need to know programming. Whatever language you pick, that's up to you. But a lot of examples that we will look at are written in Python, and I think that's the preferred language in this data science field. But you don't need to be a pro in Python. Mainly, this course is rooted in algorithms and mathematics, so this here is important. If you need any help with these prerequisites, let me know. We can revise them here in class. And there are a couple of concepts we will revise anyway. For example, in a couple of weeks, we will need eigenvalues, eigenvectors for one of the algorithms. So there'll be a short primer or revision about eigenvalues or eigenvectors in case you don't remember them. So what does this course look like? We are starting in the first half of the term with lectures. And these lectures will take like 3 hours, so 180 minutes per week, which is on Thursdays from 2 to 5 or 2 to 5:15 if we have a short break in between. And in the second half of the term, you'll be working on a project. So you need to plan for that as well. But the workload of this course is more than just 3 hours of lectures or lab sessions per week, because this course carries 5 credit points, so 5 ECTS. And as you may know, 1 credit point means the expected workload is 30 hours during the term. And since we have 5 credit points, that means the expected workload of that course for a single student is 150 hours during the term. Now, a term is approximately 15 weeks. That means the workload for this course is far more than just sitting in a lecture. It's actually about 10 hours of workload in total, so another 7 hours per week. So you should prepare for class, you need to do revisions and further exercises, and eventually working on your project. Most of the content that I cover is here in the slide deck, but I will provide some additional notes on the whiteboard, which is online through my iPad, which can be screen shared. And not all the stuff on the slide deck will be necessarily discussed, but probably most of it, but some of the methods I may not present from the slide deck, but develop this step by step in the whiteboard. Now, you're wondering obviously about what the examination will be. The only examination of this course is a project in the second half of the term. And these projects are done in groups of 2 to 3 students. And you will pick your project on any topic in and around computer vision. If you are interested, you can even do a robot vision project. We got robots with cameras. And I had already informed you in the iLearn course when you can pick your robot in case you want one. And that's on April the 10th. I had put that in the news in the course. But this is something that's becoming more relevant in a couple of weeks. But there will not be a written exam. This whole examination will be a group project. And the group size is 2 to 3 students, so no single students and no groups of 4 students, 2 to 3, which is binding, and you would propose a topic. One thing is also important. You need to register for this examination in Primus, because every year we got some students who take this course, they sit the examination, but they had not registered for the examination. And that in the past created a lot of manual work for both me as well as the admin assistants to add these marks manually to your file. That's why we have this process through Primus. So you definitely need to register for the exam. If you don't register for the exam, but you sit the examination, your mark will just disappear. We will not manually add it to your file because that's just a lot of work for me and the admin assistants. You will be informed in a couple of weeks by the Center for Studies how to register for exams. And if you got any questions about Primus or how to register in there, please don't contact me, contact the Center for Studies because I don't have access to that portal. So I'm just unable to help. If you don't find the exam, whatever in Primus, please ask the Center for Studies. But all of this will become relevant in a couple of weeks, but I'm just informing you now that you don't forget to register for the examination. Now, this year, this course is slightly different than before because we have a really cool opportunity this year in this course. I told you you would pick your project topic, and we've always done it this way. So this course, I've started teaching this course for 6 years. And we have a lot of students taking that course. So this year, 160 students or whatever registered for this course. So there will be a lot of different projects. But this year, we have a company that will also offer some projects. Concretely, that's Kronos Group. Any one of you knows Kronos Group? If you know Kronos Group, maybe send a thumbs up or a thumbs down if, or like green sticker for yes or red sticker for no. I just want to see how many know the company. So some know. So it's a very large company based close to Regensburg, and it's a large mechanical engineering corporation that builds bottling lines. And Kronos is the world market leader in bottling lines. And they will contribute projects this year as well. Concretely, they have a problem from inspection technology. So when you have bottles filled in in a bottling line, then you need to check whether the bottle is broken, whether it's filled correctly, or if the label is put on properly. And for that, there are inspection machines. And they have inspection machines that even use deep learning. But this year, they want to get that challenge. So they will offer a challenge in this course, which you could pick as your project, and they will tell you more. And concretely, this will be on April 9th. They will join this online lecture and they will tell you more about the Kronos challenge. I'm sparing you the details for now because they will tell us this in 3 weeks. But the challenge will mean they offer 40 groups, they offer to participate in this challenge. They will offer a data set and will have sort of a private challenge in Kaggle or a portal like Kaggle, where there's a leaderboard and you get the data set, you build a machine learning model, and you try to classify the images correctly, which come from this inspection machine. And then, based on the metric that we use, you will appear in the leaderboard. And Kronos wants to see how many student teams beat their current machine, and if so, by how much. So that would be sort of a private Kaggle challenge, and they will run it through Kaggle or some similar platform. And this would be one option as a project, which we will have for 40 groups. Now, there may be more than 40 groups, so we'll accept 40 groups at the most in the Kronos challenge, which will be lots of fun. And they will present this on April the 9th. On April the 23rd, we will do a kickoff of the Kronos challenge. So after April the 9th, you will have a chance to sign up for this challenge if you want to pick that as a project. If you don't want to pick it as a project, I'll say more about that in a moment. And there'll be a kickoff on campus on April the 23rd. So I will notify you about all of this later in April when it becomes more relevant. If you don't want to do a Kronos challenge, or if you don't want to do the Kronos challenge, you can do any other computer vision project. Also, I'll provide more information about this in April. Some of you that may want to do this robot vision project, you can pick this robot on April the 10th, as I have announced in the iLearn course in the news. And end of April, we will finalize the project topics. I will also inform you about the dates then. So the lectures, they will sort of finish end of April, early May, because we'll have done most of the content of this lecture part once we have finalized the project topics. There may be one more lecture in May or a guest lecture or something, but that's something we will see as this term progresses. And this Kronos challenge is really cool because you get a real data set from industry and we can see which team becomes most competitive. But we'll share more about this in April as this becomes relevant. Then once you start working on your project or the challenge, lectures will be over largely, and maybe there will be a few guest lectures, and you would work on your project, and whatever help you need, you would get in touch with me. Then end of June, we will have all the project presentations. If you pick the Kronos challenge, we will do all of these project presentations on Saturday, June 27th. And that date is already fixed because that's the day when the team from Kronos is actually free, and they will come on campus. So the project presentations will take place on campus. They will be here. All these other projects, they will take place on June 20th, 21st, and 28th. You are unable to pick the exact day. It will be assigned as I think that topics should be assigned to specific dates. So what you should do for now is you should block these 2 weekends until further notice, because that's where the project presentations will take place. And you need to attend the whole day on which your presentation would take place. So not the other days, but the day on which your presentation would take place. But you can't pick a specific day unless you do the Kronos challenge. We have one fixed day when the Kronos team will come on campus. And if you got a robot, you need to return it sometime in early July, but that will be announced as well. There's also a marking scheme here, how I mark projects, and there is a marking scheme for regular projects, but for the Kronos challenge as well. That's not relevant for now, but this will come sometime later in the term, because we first need to progress with the content. We need to assign you the projects, and then the marking will become more relevant. These dates from the slides, they are also mentioned in the iLearn course. So here are the news that I mentioned where you can pick the robot, but on the main page, there's all the relevant information of this course, like the video stream URL that you have found. The recording will appear on YouTube. There will be a new playlist. There's a playlist of last year's recordings. You can find all the course materials by following this Nextcloud. And that's what I have mentioned so far. Here are also the dates when we will have the presentations that I just mentioned. And later in the term, you can pick whether you want to be in the Kronos challenge or submit your project topic also through this iLearn course. So it's all focused in here. You'll find all the relevant information as well as the slides. And the marking is something we'll discuss in a few weeks, because we first need to look into the content. And I'll say more about the marking then. Are there any questions from you so far about the organization of the course? If you have a question, maybe just raise your hand now here in Zoom. There's a hand raise button, and turn on your mic, or type your question in the chat. So I'll just see if there are any questions for now or not. If there are questions coming in later, I'll be happy to answer them. But that's so far the organization of the course. And we can now start looking into the actual content, how computer vision systems work. You may be curious about additional literature in case you want to learn more or understand some of the concepts in this course in greater detail. What I can offer is there are a couple of books here. There's a very good book that I like personally. It's called Digital Image Processing, which has a big intersection with this course. And there are a couple of machine learning books or AI books that are helpful, like the classic deep learning book from Goodfellow and other authors. Some other deep learning book from Bishop, or the classic pattern recognition and machine learning book from Bishop, as well as the Russell Norvig textbook on AI. They all cover computer vision to some extent. This book here is focusing on digital image processing and computer vision. You will notice that I have a lot of text in my slides, because I don't read out that text, but it's meant for your revision. So you don't need to buy these books, but if you want to learn more or revise some concepts, these books, they are quite helpful. And some of the content of this course is based on these books. There is a question. A student says that one of his friends is doing a semester abroad. Can that person join the presentations? That's not possible. So the presentations, they only take place on campus, and there are no exceptions. Because in the past, there were exceptions, but there's a lot of fraud and people overuse these exceptions. So there are a couple of things I've also observed in this course that a lot of students try to choose the date or time when to present. Students come up with all sorts of excuses, like a bus was late, and a lot of grandmas have died since I'm a professor here, or all sorts of other reasons that someone lives in Munich, whatever. So there are unfortunately no exceptions, and these 2 weekends now, so block them for now. And you need to only attend that one day on campus on which your presentation takes place. So if you have your friend doing a semester abroad, maybe he or she could come in for that one day of the presentations. And when we choose the or when we determine and finalize your seminar topics, end of April, you will also know the date of your presentation, which is then a month and a half, 2 months later. So there's enough time to prepare. There is a question about the marking of the Cronus challenge. So one thing is, first of all, with marking, you can get up to 50 points in your examination. And 50 points is a 1.0. 49 points is a 1.1. But 1.1 is not a valid mark, so this gets rounded to your advantage because we only have marks 1.0, which is the best, 1.3, 1.7, 2.0. So the 1.1 would be rounded to your advantage. And then 47 points would be a 1.3, which is finally a different mark. So that means you need 20 points out of 50 to pass. So less than half actually to pass. And how do you get 50 points for a regular project? You get 50 points there's a 15-minute presentation plus, so for your group, 2 to 3 people, you have 15 minutes in total. There will be a 5-minute Q&A session, and the 50 points will be up to 10 points from the Q&A, and the other 40 points, like 5 points for the motivation of your topic. For the methodology that you have picked and explained, you get 15 points. For the regular projects are like demos, so you would show us how your system works, if it's a robot or a drone, or if it's some app or something, you would demo this to us. Plus, you would talk briefly about the lessons learned. Lessons learned is maybe something that worked out well, something that didn't work, where you need to find the workaround. So this is how you get the 50 points for a regular project. But the Cronus challenge is a little bit different because you all have the same data set. So for example, we don't need a demo. For the Cronus challenge, the presentations just take 10 minutes because it's all the same data set. But the Q&A will play a bigger role because we have the engineers from Cronus there. They may be curious. And the lessons learned is 5 points as well. And you can get 5 points for the exploratory data analysis. So exploratory data analysis means you take the data set, you look into some distributions, outliers, missing values. You would briefly present that. It's a step you anyway need to do on a data set before you start training a model. Then you pick a methodology or a model of your choice to work on this data set. You would present that. And what we are curious about is also the progress in your competition results. This does not mean you get a bad mark if you're not top of the competition, but we would like to just see where your score falls into and if you have worked over a noticeable period on that project. Because if you only at the end, just before the final presentations, submit one script and get a competition result, but you have not really tried to progress over time, this would be penalized. But the 10 points does not mean you need to be the best of the competition. We just want to see that you have progressed and you have tried and obviously got some interesting results. So you will see the marking is different of this challenge than a regular project, but it doesn't mean it's more difficult or easier. It's just totally different, and that's why there's a different scheme. And every year, a lot of students got for these regular projects very, very good marks. And for the Cronus challenge, I expect the same. So if you work hard, if you study the theory from this course, you work hard on a project, and you do a good presentation, marking is not really an issue. And there are only a few groups who last year that really got a bad score in here. But for a bad score, you would really do extremely little work. So whether picking the Cronus challenge or a regular project doesn't make much of a difference in terms of the marking. It's just a different scheme because the goal is different. Then there was a question about the robots. Um, there are like 20 robots or something available. We had more in the past, but a lot of them broke over time. And we need to think about how to get new ones or a new system. So there are enough robots available. We typically don't run out of robots. There are no bonus points. There was a question here whether there are bonus points for your mark will be entirely determined here. In the language of the presentations, ideally all of you would present in English. If you're from the German language program and you really want to present in German, then present in German, but we'll mix the groups from the different programs on these days. So just to convince all your peers and have a good Q&A, ideally do the presentation in English, but don't worry too much about the language in this course. So these were some of the questions here with regards to the organization, and I guess I have answered all of this. So there will be more about the projects and the Cronus Challenge in a few weeks' time because so far we need to start with the content of this lecture. And the books that I mentioned here, you can find the references as well in case you want to get these books. You don't need to buy them. They're just some recommendations for further reading, and quite some of this course is actually based on those references. If you look into last year's recordings, you will see some changes. The course has changed at least a little bit. I have added some topics at the end. So at the end, there is a chapter that was always called an Outlook chapter. Now it's a selected topics chapter where I've just put in more topics and we don't necessarily discuss all of them, but some. So I've added some topics like biases in data sets and uncertainty in learning. Those were topics that I taught before in the big data course, but I don't teach the big data course any longer. One of my colleagues teaches it now, and she's focusing on different topics. So I've moved two topics that I find very important into this course and linked it more to computer vision. So that's something we'll discuss. I've added a little bit of content how to visualize the learned units of a neural network. And something I've also noticed is in the past, the group size in the presentations was 3 to 4 students. And the problem was 4 students was 1 student too much also for the presentations. And it was sort of difficult to fully get who did what actually. And that's why I decided that we changed the group size from 3 to 4 now to 2 to 3 students, which really helps also that everyone can contribute to the presentation and I can get a better understanding of who did what actually. So these are, plus obviously some minor improvements. Those are the main changes I did this year in this course. And now we'll continue with the content. And we finished discussing the organization. Now, computer vision has a lot of intersections with other fields. Obviously, for example, with AI and machine learning. But there are other interpretations of computer vision, for example, from a signal processing perspective. So you're taking this course in our computer science department. If you listen to this lecture, say, or a computer vision lecture, say, in an electrical engineering department, it may look quite different. It may be less based on AI and machine learning, but maybe more on signal processing techniques. We'll also see some of those, like a Kalman filter, but the class may look quite different in a different department. Because it's a different interpretation. And sometimes that field is then not called computer vision, but machine vision, which is another term and means something slightly different based on where you look it from. There are big intersection with pattern recognition because we want to find patterns in data, but there are lots of different pattern recognition approaches, and we'll focus on machine learning in this course, in addition to some classical techniques. We obviously need mathematics. Physics is not that important to this course, but maybe in computer vision courses taught by others. And we obviously need image processing as well. Now, there's always the question, what's the difference between computer vision, image processing, and so forth? Those are a bit vague terms. So image processing would really just mean process the image, like for example, increase contrast in an image or find some features. But computer vision aims at also more higher level tasks. So from my personal interpretation, image processing is needed for computer vision, but computer vision is more than just image processing. If you talk to someone different, they may give you a different definition, but those terms are anyway, and their intersection and differences are only loosely defined. But that's how I would personally interpret this Venn diagram here. Because for image processing, we would often have some more lower level tasks. Maybe we want to improve the contrast of an image. We want to remove some blur from an image, which blur can be from a camera, can be from motion. Maybe we want to enhance structure of an image or in an image. We want to enhance the color, maybe remove some defects like scratches or other noise, but that's not the goal of computer vision. It's rather a more low-level task that we may need for higher-level vision tasks. So that's what image processing means to me. And computer vision, it's often more higher-level tasks, like maybe we want to determine the type of an object in a picture. We want to assess an object for quality. We may want to break a picture into different parts, maybe into different segments. Maybe we have multiple images of the same object and we want to reconstruct a 3D representation. We could also think about extracting a line of an object, or maybe infer some hidden properties in a scene that we actually don't see, but we see other objects and we may want to make some conclusions based on that. So these could be some example computer vision tasks, and they differ quite a lot from image processing, but image processing is absolutely needed as one of the early stages in building these examples here. Now, there is another interesting differentiation. What's actually the difference between computer vision and computer graphics? So both terms start with computer, but one is computer graphics and the other one is computer vision. And oftentimes these two terms are somehow mixed up in a lot of discussions. This course will really focus on computer vision, not really on computer graphics. But what is the difference between these two terms? So in computer graphics, what we have is we have some model that we describe. For example, geometry of some objects, lights, materials, maybe some camera angle, and some other stuff of a scene. And then we use a renderer to create a rendered image from the model. But computer vision actually does the exact opposite. In computer vision, we take a photo of some scene and then we want to infer these properties. So we take a photo of this scene And then we use some computer vision system, maybe some type of neural network or something different. And we want to infer the geometry, we want to infer maybe some other properties, materials, which objects and how they relate from each other or how they relate with each other purely from this image. So we try to infer these model properties from an image in computer vision, while in computer graphics, we want to generate an image from these models. So that's why, to me, computer vision is actually the exact opposite of computer graphics. And this course will focus on computer vision. Obviously, we may see a couple of computer graphics things too, but the real focus will be on computer vision, and computer graphics is actually just the exact opposite of what we are doing in this course. And there are some lots of interesting questions that come up when we build vision systems. And I find vision systems super interesting because it's something we can see, we can visualize, we can see the real scene, and then we can wonder how a computer can process this. And building vision systems has become much easier than just a few years ago because we have a lot of good models now, a lot of pre-trained models, a lot of architectures that are best practice, and you don't need to build every tiny piece from scratch, but rather you can reuse a lot of stuff and then build ever more complex systems. But there are still a lot of fundamental questions that you need to think about early on when you build a vision system. So also when you think about your project that you need to think about. So for example, you have images, but what is the information that you're looking for in the image? That's the first thing. Later you think about how you can do this. But first of all, what is the information that is sought from the image? How is that information manifest in the image? Do we need prior knowledge about the image, the scene? For example, do we already know we just want to detect, say, cars? But then the question is which cars, or could there be other things as well we want to detect? So that could be prior knowledge. What is the nature of the underlying computational process? And then once we find that information in the image, how would we represent that information actually? So this could be some early questions when you think about designing a vision system. An example could be you want to locate a house among trees, then you could think about maybe very straight lines are an intrinsic characteristic of houses, not trees. Not trees are not fully straight, but houses probably are. So that could help us to distinguish between houses and trees in an image. Also, say we have an image and we want to separate land from sea. And we'll have illumination, so there will be reflections in the image, but uniform reflections could be a characteristic of sea, not necessarily the land. But maybe not always for the sea as well if there are waves in the sea. But the reflections from the sea would be totally different than the reflections from land. So this could be maybe some prior knowledge or some prior information we have, and that could be helpful to build that vision system. Now, vision is very vague. What do you see here? I see a vase. What else could you see here? If you see something different, tell us. So one person sees two faces. We got this more often now as an answer. Now, if you have now let's vote what you have seen first. If you have seen a vase first, send a thumbs up. If you have seen two faces first, send a thumbs down. So we'll just vote and see who actually got the vase first and who got the faces first. So we have like the maturity for the vase. Well, I've seen this example many times, but today when I looked at it, probably I saw the vase as well first. All right. But so we see vision is vague. There is uncertainty. You may see totally different stuff in here. What do you see here? I see a young woman who has her nose here, her ear there, the eyelid there, and she has a scarf here. So I see this young lady. Does anyone see anything else or something different? One person sees an old woman with a big nose. So this here would be the nose. This would be the other eye there, and the mouth. Yes. So again, send me a thumbs up if you saw the young woman first, or a thumbs down if you saw the old woman first. So huge majority for the young woman, like 90% majority or something. Okay. But these are some common examples you have probably seen, but now I got some new ones. So what do you see here? This looks like, I don't know, a spaceship, if you look at it, and you see humans here, but also some reflection of humans. If you have looked at the slide before, you will see what the solution is. But first of all, you don't get much out of it. Whatever this here is, maybe a spaceship or something different. But if you rotate that image by 180 degrees, it may become more clear. There's actually a car in the river. You have those people here from the fire station coming to help, and this is the reflection in the river. While if you looked at the original image over here, this more maybe looked like the original, and this one looked like the reflection. At least if you look at it for the first time and you wondered, what is this thing in the sky? So maybe just rotating the image can help to get a better understanding. So we see vision is tricky, and there's a lot of uncertainty here with those examples. Or this one here. So we have plenty of bread over here, and we see this cat here. Actually looks like my cat, similar color almost, but I found the image on the internet. It's not my cat, but it looks quite similar to my cat. And we see this cat here has the same color, more or less the same shape, like the bread, some artifacts here, maybe like this. So a computer vision system that is trained largely on this bread data and not much on other data may classify this cat as a bread as well. That would actually be a so-called biased data set. So the training set is biased from a certain domain, and your machine learning model that was trained on such data would not necessarily generalize very well. So you see, for us as a human, we detect a cat. A vision system that we build purely based on data may struggle to detect a cat. And there are other examples of this one here, like muffin or dog. Has any one of you ever seen such examples of muffin or dog or the cat or the bread? If you have, maybe send me some signal if this is something you have seen before. And here as well. So I see lots of support actually. So this one here is clearly a muffin, or this one, but this dog doesn't look too different to the muffin. This one maybe more looks like a dog. Um, this one is clearly a muffin, but some of them they actually look quite close if you look at them. Also, the muffin here is easy to detect. But a computer vision system may struggle to classify based on the training data. Say, if a computer vision system was trained a lot on animals, but not much on other classes, it would probably classify a lot of these muffins as a dog as well. If we have largely dog images like that in our training set. There are lots of other types of dogs as well, and lots of other scenes, a lot of other angles, a lot of other illuminations. So that could all complicate this. Now, when we start building vision systems, the literature often distinguishes between three different levels of vision. Our ultimate goal is obviously think about high level vision. We want to detect objects and images and maybe track them, whatever. But in order to just get to building high level vision systems, we need to think about lower level vision as well, because we start with pixels and images. So maybe we want to detect edges and corners, which are very low level features. Low level does not necessarily mean easy to detect because depth is a different entity. So depth means distance from the camera. So you have pixels in your image, but you wonder the thing that is the object that is shown at a certain pixel, how far is it from the camera? That would be depth. Maybe a low level vision feature, yet difficult to determine because we need to build a very complex vision system. There's also the so-called optical flow, so motion in an image, but we'll see the optical flow in a couple of weeks. And then there are intermediate level vision systems that are about finding contours. Contours could help us to find objects later, or we have regions in images, so-called segments. That can be maybe some way to find some structure in an image. And then based on region and contours, we can later find objects or other hidden information system. Other hidden information. Now, in this course, we will look at all three levels of vision. And we will start today with low level vision, because we want to see, for example, edges, simple features. Next week, we'll look at slightly more complex features like corners. We will see contours and regions. In a few weeks' time, we will see how we can detect objects. So step by step, this will become more complex. Depth and optical flow will come a little bit later in this course because they are not the primary concern of the initial introduction to computer vision. And here's a lot of text that I'm not reading out. It's just maybe to supplement what I've just said or to summarize or whatever. So feel free to read this as some further notes for your revision. The human eye is, I think, actually fantastic, and not just the eye, but also the sensor processing and the nerve system that we have that can process what the eye sees. Because our eyes, they can deal extremely well if we have different levels of illumination, if we have different angles of objects, different distances. Our eye can deal very well with that. And we want to build vision systems that do extremely well. In some vision systems, we can beat humans a lot. For example, in certain inspection systems, but maybe with more broader use cases, human vision is far superior to today's computer vision systems. And the human eye, I think it's just extremely fantastic, really exciting to see how it works and how we process that information, and from how we learn from very little training data, because we just need to see an object maybe 2 or 3 times, we can learn from it. A machine learning system that we build nowadays needs much more training data. So that's something I find fascinating. In this course, we are not discussing how the human eye works. It's something you have anyway learned in high school in biology. Feel free to read more or watch this video if you wish. But this course is not about human vision. It's how to build computer vision systems. And computer vision systems, or building computer vision systems, is extremely challenging because images are noisy. Because we always have some shadows, some reflections, some blur in an image, different focus in an image, a motion, let's say if something is moving while we took the image, all of this leads to noise. The human eye can filter out a lot of that noise very easily. We as humans, we struggle to filter that out when we try to build vision systems, because we need to build them the right way that they can at least somehow handle that noise. But then also, if we see different objects, they can appear in different appearances, different shapes, different sizes, different colors, under different lighting conditions. For us as humans, we can often filter this out quite easy, but if we build an artificial system, we need to make it at least somewhat invariant to that. We also need some cognitive ability for image understanding, and computer vision becomes even more challenging if we connect it to robotics and build robot vision systems, because there's a massive data rate, 20 to 30 images per second, so there are real-time requirements. But if you build a robot vision system, that's also very rewarding because we actually have something that keeps moving and interacting with the environment. Now, so far, I have skipped the first bullet point. Computer vision is a so-called under-constrained inverse problem. Now, what does that mean? What is an under-constrained inverse problem? First of all, we we deal with a 3D world, but we mainly have 2D images. In most computer vision applications, we have 2D images, but actually we try to reason about a 3D world. And an inverse problem means actually in general that an inverse problem is the process of calculating from a set of observations the causal factors that produce them. That's an inverse problem. And so computer vision is an inverse problem. So we have 2D images and we try to infer about a 3D world where all of this comes from. And it's severely under constrained because there's a lot of information we don't have, and there's a lot of noise and all of this, which severely complicates building computer vision systems. Now, we have started the introduction and we finished the introduction, and now I'll come back to the contents here. I have mentioned a few times machine learning today. Now, most of you are in the fourth semester of the AI undergrad program in our department, the German one or the English one. And only now in your fourth semester, you actually have finished, the introduction to maths, algorithms, programming, operating systems, and some AI introductions like logic. And now you have in parallel a machine learning course. This course is also about machine learning, but I don't expect you to have a lot of prior exposure to machine learning. We'll do most of the machine learning in this course in the convolutional neural networks chapter. And there we actually start from scratch with machine learning. And I'll just show you the very foundations of machine learning you need in order to build convolutional neural networks. Does any of you, or did any of you so far do any work around machine learning? Because I know we have some students maybe from other semesters or exchange students or from other programs. If you feel comfortable with machine learning, maybe just send a thumbs up or something. So I just see how many students are there who have actually done some more machine learning, because maybe you have done some further studies, whatever. I know you're just doing your machine learning course in parallel to this course. At least if you're from these undergrad programs. So I saw about 10 hands raised. That's okay. But for the others, you don't need to be a pro in machine learning yet, because we'll get to machine learning mainly in this convolutional neural networks chapter, also a bit here actually in the segmentation chapter. But I'll explain all of the necessary machine learning foundations as well. There's also this deep learning course, which is a mandatory course in 1 year in your undergrad program. That deep learning course will cover neural networks a lot, but it will not necessarily cover a lot convolutional neural networks, because we're doing convolutional neural networks in this course. So in the deep learning course, you'll maybe see some more LLMs and some other neural network architectures, but convolutional neural networks are discussed in detail here in this course. And in the selected topics, we will also see some vision transformers, which is another approach using neural networks for vision. And we will also contrast the vision transformers to the convolutional neural networks. But we still start with convolutional neural networks because they are still a bit easier to understand than the vision transformers. And they are still very, very helpful despite there are now vision transformers. The vision transformers not just have some pros, they also have some cons. And that's why we'll compare them in selected topics. And we are starting today with low-level vision. So we start with pixels and filters, try to get some simple features. Next week, we do regions of images. And then next week, we also start looking into feature detection. We want to find some more complex features and then we have looked into low-level and mid-level vision. And then we can start into high-level vision, try to detect objects. We'll see different ways how we can do this. And then we will also look into convolutional neural networks, plus some other topics. So this is the golden thread of this course. So the agenda for what we're going to do in the coming weeks. Don't worry too much about your project yet. I think once we have done a few weeks of lectures, you will also come up more easy with some project ideas. Plus, we have the Cronus Challenge, and I would be happy if many, many of you contribute to the Cronus Challenge. So we have 40 groups, so 2 to 3 students per group. If 160 students signed up, not everyone would be able to join the Cronus Challenge, but probably a lot of you. And that would be really cool if we have a lot of teams competing with each other. Now, one more note about the content. I also want to explain why I have picked these topics. And we are doing lectures for the first half of the term, and then the second half of the terms we do projects. I think projects are important, so you not just do the same coursework that everyone does, but you actually come up with something that works and something that was partially your own idea. And that's something helpful to show to potential employers when you're looking for an internship or a job. It's better to have built something that works than just doing the same coursework that everyone does every year. In order to allow you to build these projects, we need quite some content in this course. So when I designed this course for the first time 6 years ago, I wondered which topics I should put in this course, especially given we use the first half of the term for teaching and then the second half for the projects. So I looked a little bit at what others are teaching, in addition to looking into the books. So I did my master's in England at Imperial College. I did the machine learning masters at Imperial College, so one of the worldwide top universities. And when I was there was an introduction to computer vision. There was a more advanced course as well. And then I looked a little bit what they offer in that program at the moment. And when I designed this course, I also looked at what Stanford and MIT were doing. And I always looked at the introductory course as well as at the advanced course. So I looked at these 6 courses from 3 top universities, and I picked the topics from these courses that I find important and that are probably relevant also to building real stuff that works. So some stuff we are doing here in this course is maybe done in an advanced vision lecture at MIT or Imperial or Stanford. Now you're wondering, how could you master this course? So the good thing is there's no written examination, but you have a project. So there's more freedom in what you do. But every year I see a lot of phenomenal projects in this course. And I think the reason we get phenomenal projects is because I challenge you a lot in the lectures. And believe me, they will be quite tough and there will be a lot of content. But there's no written exam at the end. And obviously, for some topics, I maybe add some primer for the math, or I explain them maybe in greater detail than it would be explained in some advanced machine learning lecture at MIT. So you will be able to understand this, but you need to spend enough time on your revision and further studies. That's why I've mentioned what 5 ECTS mean when we started an hour ago. Now, in the pixels and filters chapter, we will first look at digital cameras and how we can represent images in a digital version. We will see how noise can affect digital images. We will see how we can process digital images with so-called filters. Sometimes they're also called masks or operators or whatever. And then we will see one type of approach, how we can find actual edges in an image. So edges are changes of intensity, and those are very helpful actually as a low level property, which can help us later to build more high level structure. So we will then look into digital cameras. Uh, all of you use digital cameras all the time, and maybe in some other lecture or other resource, you have learned in detail how they work. And there are lots of resources to learn in detail how digital cameras work in case you wish. What I'm more interested in is now briefly the kind of digital image we get out of a digital camera. Because what we got here is a lens, and eventually we want to map from the lens to some sort of pixel array. And if you see this from the real world, we have a scene element. So it could be this object here. And this one is continuous. Continuous means its shape is continuous, as well as its illumination from the source is continuous. Now, when we have a digitized image, we lose that property. And what we got next is not continuous anymore, but discrete. And because we have our imaging system, like our camera, and eventually this one gets mapped on this internal image plane. And then what we need to get out is a digitized or discrete structure. What we see here is that the scene element, its shape is not continuous anymore, but it's digitized because we have an image which is m rows and n columns. So this matrix is m times n. So we map this shape onto this digitized or discrete structure. So we lose this continuous shape because when we digitize something from the analog real world, we have a loss of information. But we not only lose information in the shape, we also lose information in some other property. Who of you knows where else we will lose information in addition to the shape? If you know this, maybe just raise your hand and then tell us either orally or through the chat as you wish. And I just want to see if anyone raises his or her hand, if you have a clue where else we lose information here in addition to the shape. And if you feel you have no clue, then maybe just sent a red sticker. Depth, yes, that's correct. We lose depth. I didn't think about depth here, but that information gets lost too. But there is a question here about the color and lighting. I'm particularly interested about the color. And we just imagine this is now grayscales. It's now RGB or whatever color yet. When you look at how the intensity distributes here, this is continuous too. But for our pixel values, we don't have continuous values, rather discrete values too. So if we have a certain number of bits, there is a certain number of possible values we can store in here. So the intensity here is also not continuous anymore, but rather discrete, as you can see. For example, from 0 to 255 for 8 bits, so 1 byte, but you could pick some other system as well, not necessarily a byte. You could maybe pick 2 bytes, you could pick 4 bits, whatever. And there's often the convention that a 0 would mean black and 255, so the maximum value in that byte would be completely white, and then in between you have these intensities. So this here would be quite a low value, while those would be yeah, while these brighter ones would be larger values. Not 255, but closer to 255. So we see this is what we get out of our digital camera, and concretely, we can represent this as a matrix. So I try to use a convention here in this course where a matrix is a capital in bold. So capital A in bold denotes our matrix. And our matrix has m many rows and n many columns. And each element in here would be, for example, a byte. So I can represent a pixel intensity in here from 0 to 255, from 0 to 255 here, and so forth. So, and the convention is I start with indexes 0. So the row index is from 0 up to m minus 1. And the column index is from 0 up to n minus 1. So it's an m times n matrix, m rows, n columns. And this, for largely in this course, we deal with grayscale images, where I've said before 0 refers to black and 255 for white, and then the other intensities would be in between in that range. And we will look in a few places into color images, but most of computer vision applications internally to detect something, they would use some grayscale representation. In fact, you can convert very, very easily a color image to a grayscale image. But every year there are some students, they pick obviously color images as well for their algorithms. But a lot of algorithms we look at, they can simply be done much, much easier if they run on a grayscale representation than on a color image. And now there will be a few words, obviously, about color images as well. There are different color models. Probably the most common one is the RGB color model, where you have 3 bytes per pixel, and 1 byte is for the red value, 1 byte for the green value, and one for the blue value. So you have these three, they're called channels, and you would blend them by assigning different values to red, green, and blue. And there are other representations as well, like CMY, where you have cyan, magenta, and yellow. This is, for example, a representation you would see in a lot of printers, for example, like here in my laser printer that I have at home. This would be the colors. And you can convert from RGB to CMY back and forth quite easy. And RGB can be converted very easily into grayscale, for example. So if you have in each pixel, you have a byte for red, one for green, and one for blue, you could add up these three values, and then you need a valid value, which could, in if you add up these three values, it may be more than 255, then it wouldn't be a valid value anymore. So you would add up these three channel values and divide the sum by three. And then it's a valid value that would fit into a byte. And that's a very common conversion to convert from RGB to from RGB to grayscale. You lose information, so converting back from grayscale to RGB isn't that easy. That's something that is called image colorization. It's actually a task for which nowadays a lot of neural networks are being used, that they try to color images. So something you can see from old historic images from 120 years ago or 100 years ago. You want to see what they may look like in a color scheme. So there are nowadays very interesting algorithms that do this. But certainly converting from RGB to grayscale is much easier than the other way around because you lose information here when you add up three values and divide it by three. Now, there's a whole family of color models as well. One here is the HSI model. Has any one of you ever seen a color model like this, HSI? Maybe you have seen something like this in Photoshop or somewhere. A few have seen it. Maybe you can tell us in the chat where you have seen such an HSI model. Um, just let us know in the chat. And there are lots of variations of these of this kind of model we see here, and I'll cover them briefly. I'll wait for your responses where you have seen such a model before. And or I'll just speak in parallel and see when your answer is coming in. So HSI stands for hue, saturation, and intensity. And this is depicted here. So hue is this H, it's an angle. So it's, for example, to move from this reddish world into this greenish world, for example. And this would be that angle, so how much you go along in this circle. And then you have also a saturation S, which is sort of how strongly you would see this reddish or greenish. And you also have an intensity, which is also part of it. And if you have the absolute value for intensity, you're up here, you just have a white pixel, while you have just the lowest value possible for the intensity, you would just have a black. So you have these two cones in here, the upper cone and lower cone, in which you're operating. And you can manipulate H, S, and I to get a different color here. And this is something you may have seen in Photoshop or some other software. And it's actually quite interesting because it has some benefits over RGB. So RGB is something you can imagine very easy, red, green, and blue, and I mix this. If you look at some very old TVs, so long before these thin displays, just these very old TVs, you could see that they were based on such a scheme. And you can imagine you mix these three colors, you blend them in some way. The HSI is a totally different representation, but for example, if you have some color and you want to keep that saturation and intensity, but you want to change it from reddish to greenish or bluish, you would just manipulate that angle and you would move around here. And you can keep the saturation and intensity the same. Or you can add more saturation without touching the two other parameters. That's something that's not possible with the RGB model. And here you can quite easy. And there are some formula to get from RGB to HSI and back, so there's no loss of information. It's just a conversion. In a lot of computer vision classes, for example, the ones that I've seen also when I was a student. Oftentimes, this would be one of the first lab problems. You would have some formula and implement it, how to convert from RGB to HSI. But honestly, you can look up the equation, the formulas if you wish. We just assume there's a library here to do this, or maybe in a computer graphics lecture, this would be maybe something you would look at in greater detail. But we don't look too much into color images anyway, so we don't need these formula here in detail. But feel free to look them up. They're actually not that tricky. It's just takes a little bit of time to code them. For instead of this HSI, there are a lot of variations, and some of you have like we got about 10 hands raised of students who have seen HSI. In fact, HSI is of a whole family of so-called HSX models, where HS and stay and I may be replaced by V for value, L for lightness, B for brightness. All of these models mean something slightly different. There are some variations that only use one cone, not two cones, for example. And it's just variations and also what the intensity means, that it's a value, lightness or brightness. And then these models work slightly differently. So whether it's one cone or cones depend on the model. Here, it does not really matter because what we do is we'll anyway work a lot with grayscale. And if you're curious about the conversions, just look it up. Now, here's a very famous color image that we will actually briefly look into. Anyone has seen this image before? If if you have, maybe thumbs up. If you have not seen this image, maybe thumbs down. This image is very popular in the computer vision domain. And it's called, this lady here is called Lena or Lena, based on the source where you look at. And this image is somehow interesting in the computer vision domain because of these different edges, different colors, and this one has been widely used for image processing. And in fact, what is the source? It comes from a Playboy magazine in the 1970s. And in fact, this image here is only cropped. There's actually much more further down that you can see in this Playboy magazine, which we're not discussing here in this course. Not important. But this image is simply used often as a reference image in computer vision and image processing. Now, in recent years, with all this wokeness, a lot of people have started to rally against this image, and there's some people have this aim of eliminating the use of this Lena image. I'm not particularly fancy about the image, but I simply have a few examples in this course where this image is also used because it has simply been used for decades in the literature. And there's simply a lot of examples. But we don't care about what the whole image looks like. There are other resources you can look at if you're curious, but doesn't matter here. I just wanted to briefly mention the history of where this image comes from. I for many years didn't know where it actually came from. I only knew this face here and only learned many years later that it's actually from this magazine. But yeah, that's the history of this Lena image. And we will now look a little bit into noise of images. So we just look at the grayscale image. And what we have here is an image which is, I don't know, maybe a few hundred times a few hundred pixels. And we have this box here in red. And we now want to look at the pixels that are in here, in this small red rectangle. And what we see is the rectangle is depicted here. So it's 33 pixels wide, so along the x-axis, and 23 pixels here. So it's a 23 by 33 pixel matrix, in fact. And what we see here is the intensity. So 0 would be black, 255 would be white. And what we see here, this lower area, it's dark pixels, not completely 0, but darker, which is the actual inner part of the eye. And the outer part of the eye, the white part, is up here because this is much closer to 255. So this red rectangle depicts this one here. Maybe just confirm with some thumbs up or thumbs down if you understand this visualization. Because we all need to be on the same page when we start exploring this now, and but that looks fine. And now, if we add noise, there's a type of noise that is sometimes called salt and pepper noise. Salt and pepper means you just have this paper and you would spread out salt and pepper over this image. And then you have these artifacts here. And then these artifacts would also appear where we have placed our rectangle. And what we see is there are a lot of noise now because we have some very, very dark areas suddenly, also where the white area was supposed to be, but also some very, very white pieces suddenly where we didn't expect any white. So that's the effect of salt and pepper noise. And there are many sources of salt and pepper noise, maybe illumination, maybe some bugs in your code or in your device that processes data. And when we have this noise, and noise can have many other factors too, but for example, illumination towards our camera, then it becomes much more difficult to process something like this than this. So if we assume we want to detect the eye, our prior knowledge, we would say, white is this regime. We have this lower plateau, which would be the actual inner part of the eye, and this outer plateau would be the white area. If this is some of the intrinsic properties we would define in our vision system, so not necessarily based on learning, but by describing some rules, and we add a lot of noise, then it will probably not work very well. So, and our whole image processing system would struggle to identify the eye. What we want to do now is we are curious how we can get rid of noise. And to get rid of noise, we will look into a concept that is called a filter. Concretely, a local average filter. And for this, I will now switch to my iPad and we start developing this filter together. So just wait briefly. So now maybe just confirm in the chat if you can see my whiteboard. Good. Sometimes there are some strange issues with the whiteboard. It just stops streaming, whatever. If this happens, just ping me here in the chat while I'm focused on developing this filter. So we look at a so-called local average filter. And what it does is we have our image, our original, or some image we want to process, where we can look at the individual pixels. So our image F at pixel MN. And we now want to process this image to get to our result image. And our result image is G. And there we also have an index I and J. So I for the row, J for the column. Over here in F, it's M for the row and N for the column. And now I want to somehow process these pixels in some way in order to get my result. And what I do here is I look into a region of, so I have my ij, and I will look into the region of pixels around ij. So I need a sum sign, and I'll explain the sum sign in a moment. What I need is an omega ij, and omega ij gives me the neighborhood of this pixel ij. And now it's actually a set. So I go through this set, and the elements in the set are mn. So I have a tuple in the set, and mn is the neighborhood of this pixel ij. And I go through the neighborhood and I sum up all the pixels in the neighborhood. The neighborhood can include my actual pixel plus the pixels around it. I can sum all of this up, but when I sum these pixels up, I don't have a valid value anymore, so I need to divide by something. And what I could pick, for example, is a factor w, and w is the factor by which I divide. W could be the size, for example, of this neighborhood. Say if I'm looking at 9 pixels in my neighborhood, I sum them up, then I have to divide by 9 because I looked at 9 pixels in the neighborhood. This is a so-called local average filter, and this would make use of the redundancy of the data and replace the current pixel with the average of its neighboring pixels. For example, we can visualize this. Say I have this pixel image, and I'm just mocking this. Say it's all about this. So in blue, this would be ij. So ij. And the neighborhood, so say the neighborhood would then put it like this. So the neighborhood would be all of this, including this one. So this would be all the neighborhood. The actual pixel and its 8 pixels around, we have grayscale values. We add them up and we divide it by 9. But could be a different neighborhood function as well. And what this would allow us to do is, if I do this for every pixel ij, that I look into the neighborhood, I add them up and divide them by the size of the neighborhood, then um, I would wash out the noise. The question is if it would get a bit darker then, not necessarily, because I divide by 9 if the size of the neighborhood is 9, or I would divide by 20 if the neighborhood was 20. So it doesn't necessarily make it darker, but it will wash out some noise. But we'll see some examples in a second. And very importantly, when you build your result G, always work on F, the original image. So if you change ij to here, for example, always use the neighborhood of the original image. Don't use the neighborhood of an image that you have already partially started to or to run the local average filter on, but always read from the original image. Otherwise, this will lead to some strange output that you don't want. So you would create a new image and step by step build these pixels. We can see examples of this over here. So local average filter is what we just looked into. Say we have this original noisy image, and we would run once the local average filter. We would see this noise get slowly washed out. And if I run on this image the filter a second time, I would get something like this. Do you feel the noise is disappearing? Maybe send us your comments or thumbs up, thumbs down. Yes, do you notice some other effect that is happening as well? We are washing out the noise, but what else is happening? It's getting more blurry. There's a question here about image compression. Yes, you could do image compression sort of, well, you wouldn't do exactly this for the image compression. The image compression is, you could, for example, yeah, you could slightly amend this to make an image smaller, but for image compression, you would use actually something much more sophisticated. But this approach could be used that you make regions smaller. Yeah, could be done. But what I wanted to see is I get answers here. It's becoming more blurry. The image quality decreases. And that means concretely the density, the pixel density, well, the pixel density doesn't change because we still have the same number of pixels, but the sharpness gets blurred out too because we have sharper objects here and they also tend to become more blurry. And sharpness is also helpful later to find edges. It's something we want. So that's a problem too. Now we will study some of these filter now in greater detail. And there are lots of different filters. We have seen this local average filter. You could have a weighted local average filter. So weighted would mean maybe the immediate neighborhood would count more than others. So we have a bigger neighborhood and the further out, the less important. You could have some threshold saying only certain values in a certain range get considered. Maybe we don't, because what we calculated was just a mean. Now the mean is sensitive to outliers. We could also calculate the median, which is more robust. So there are a lot of different filters that we could use here if we wish. Um, and that's just a small selection. The rest of today, we're actually looking at filters and we will generalize this a bit. What we will see now is a so-called convolution. This integral here, don't get scared. I'll say a few words about it in a moment. These convolutions, first of all, when we speak soon about filters, convolutions, kernels, maps, that's all the same thing very soon for us. A convolution would mean that our general filtering scheme, we can represent this as a convolution. So not just the local average filter, but in general so-called filters. And it's actually a way of combining two functions. A function, what one function would be reading out from the source. So f would be the original signal, that would be the image, and h would be a so-called convolutional mask. And what we build here is the convolution of f and its mask. And that would lead to a so-called filtered signal, which is our result. This is not just in one dimension, so just an array. It's not a matrix yet. And these convolutions can be described as we have the original signal and we multiply it with our convolutional mask. But this is an integral from minus infinite to plus infinite and along u. Now, this can again be extended to a two-dimensional convolution because we are interested in a matrix of and not just an array. So we would have our original signal, the image f, with parameters u and v. So u for the row and v for the column. Then this convolutional mask becomes more complex, and it's actually an integral within an integral. And the inner one along u, the outer one along v to represent this two-dimensional convolution. This is a notation that is preferred, for example, in electrical engineering or signal processing, because they build a lot of systems that deal with continuous signals. But we are in a computer science department, so we care about discrete signals. So we don't need these integrals from minus infinity to plus infinity, but we will use actually a much simpler approach, as you will see in a moment. But if you took computer vision, as I said, in a signal processing, electrical engineering department, you would probably be spending a lot of time with these integrals. But we don't need that here in the computer science department. So it will actually become much simpler because we deal with discrete signals, and these convolutions can be visualized as well. But what you will see soon is these integrals that we have here, they will turn into sums. And then this becomes much simpler because we deal with continuous units. And in fact, that's what we've got here then. This would be the so-called discrete two-dimensional convolution. Before, we had just this continuous two-dimensional convolution, and now we have a discrete one. So again, for our pixel ij, we need the neighborhood of ij, for which we have these tuples mn in the set. We have our original signal, the original image, and we have this convolutional mask. What this mask looks like is something we will see in a moment. The thing is, this is still a highly generic representation, but this can actually be visualized for concrete convolutions, and this will make it a whole lot easier. If you look at our convolutional average filter, the one I had visualized before, we said we want to calculate a pixel value in the result image by looking at the neighborhood of the pixel. And we didn't do any weighting. We just said all the pixels matter the same, and the neighborhood was these 3 times 3 pixels. This can be represented in our notation quite easy, because this is our center pixel, and these are the 8 pixels around the center. And this notation would mean sum up these 8 pixel values and divide the result by 9. I can do weighting if I want. I can put in a 2 here. So I would say I would give double importance to my actual pixel and only regular importance to the pixels around it. Do I need to change anything in here if I put a 2 in here? Is there anything I need to change? What do you think? If I put in a 2 here, does the rest stay? I got a direct message. Yes, I need to change this one here. I need to divide by the number of factors. So if I put in a 2 here, then I need to divide by 10. Otherwise, I will get wrong values, possibly even impossible values. So this is quite cool then, because with this notation, we can work, we can define filters, and this looks probably much better than something like this, or even worse than this. So we as computer scientists, we prefer really the discrete ones, so we don't need this two-dimensional convolution. Rather, we use something like this. Do you all feel more comfortable with this matrix here rather than the two integrals? Maybe let me know which one you prefer. Good. I mean, everyone feels more comfortable with this one here. And I've said this before, there are a lot of synonyms. Sometimes we speak about convolutions, filters, kernel, masks, operators. From now on, these are all synonyms. I will probably speak often about a convolution or a filter. Sometimes I may say kernel, mask, or operator. It's all the same, and it's all this concept here for now. I'd be happy if I was using the one term all the time, but probably not. And the literature is also highly distinct. So, but all of these five terms are synonyms as now for now, at least the way we use them. And there are lots of different filters. You see, the Wikipedia page is not called filter, but it's called kernel, because we can also call this a kernel, an operator, a filter, a mask, a convolution. This one here would be the identity filter, because this ugly thing here is just the our source image. And the identity just means I only look at my pixel. I don't look at the neighborhood. I don't sum I don't sum up anything, so there's nothing to divide from. Um, so you see, this is probably the simplest filter possible because I just don't change the image at all. I just copy paste the pixels. The local average filter we saw before is this one here. Sometimes this is also called a box blur, and we see the original image and we blur these artifacts, this noise in the background. However, we also blur the sharpness, for example, around the eye, the ears, um, the head, whatever. And now we can just amend this scheme quite a lot, in fact. Something that is quite popular is a so-called Gaussian blur. So like a Gaussian function where you have the maximum in the center, and then the further you go away from the mean, or it has its maximum in the mean, and around the mean, you just get closer and closer to zero. So we would say this is a 4. The immediate pixels to north, east, south, west get factor 2, so they are less important than the center. But the ones in the diagonal, they are theoretically not 1 pixel away, but somewhat further away, like either 2 steps or square root 2. So this would be importance 1 in the diagonal, and we would sum these factors up, and this would be 16. So the Gaussian blur is quite a famous scheme because we give importance to the immediate neighborhood, and the further you go away, the less important. And there's a Gaussian blur proposed in the literature. It's a 5 times 5 Gaussian blur where we see we give more still most importance to the center, but we look into a bigger neighborhood, and all these factors summed up is 256. So this is something um, mentioned in the literature. And these numbers in the matrix, yes, that's the weights, that's the importance. So the importance of my actual pixel, the importance of the neighborhood, and we can increase or decrease the neighborhood as we wish. Are you all okay with this representation here? All right. Then you can also put in negative values if you want. So we look at our original image, which was this one here. And as we blur, we can also try to sharpen an image. So we just do the opposite of blurring. We do sharpening, and sharpening would mean we take, for example, our pixel importance 5, and the neighborhood northeast southwest is -1, so it gets subtracted. And finally, these weights, they add up to 1 because 5 -1 -1 -1 -1 is 1. So I don't need a factor here in front. And this will sharpen the image, so the noise will become even more apparent. The edges probably too, but it's very important that blurring and sharpening, they will not just magically undo each other. You can feel free to program this as an exercise. You blur an image, then you sharpen it, you blur it again, you sharpen it. It will not just magically undo. It will maybe try to wash out the noise. Here, you try to recreate the noise, but there's still a loss of information. So if you run this many, many times, you will not just get magically the same image. Rather, the quality of the image will be declining all the time. But this is just to show you there are a lot of different filters available. We can blur, we can sharpen, and so forth. And and here are the results. And you can fairly easily program this in Python with some libraries. We'll see some libraries next week already, how to deal with image data. So either for now you can figure this out on your own, or you'll see some libraries next week how we can do all of this. Now that we have done the filters, we will look at a concrete application of filters to do a very important low-level vision task. Remember these three vision levels we started discussing an hour and a half ago. We start with low-level tasks, and those include, for example, edges. So an edge is usually just a change of intensity or brightness where you have a sharp change of intensity. And these edges, it's something we as humans use in our vision system. And edges are, in fact, also a very, very helpful feature in computer vision as a low-level feature in order to build more high-level features and later even detect objects and so forth. And an edge, very importantly, it will not give us a perfect contour. Rather, we will start now with seeing how we can find edges. So, for example, when intensity changes, we are not there yet to put a proper contour for some object or something that is going fully around an object, but rather we start just with the edges. And edge detection is, as I said, a fundamental tool in image processing. And we are so far not in the machine learning world yet. Rather, we manually build these vision systems. But something that you would see is when we look into convolutional neural networks in, I think, 2 weeks or so, um, these convolutional neural networks, they also start learning edge detection as one of the first tasks in the early layers. And in the later layers, they learn to detect more higher level features. So here we now learn how we can describe edge detection. When it comes to neural networks, we see how we can learn and edge detection on our own. But we'll see that in a few weeks. Now, there's in Wikipedia this image here of this girl holding this flower, and we want to find the edges in that photo. What we see here is she's holding this flower. Her hands are there, has a lot of hair in her face. There are a lot of edges in the clothes. Um, do you think this example here of edge detection or the result is fine? Maybe you can tell us, and you're always welcome to turn on your mic to tell us where you maybe agree with the edge detection, where you think it gave us good results, but also maybe where some important property was missing.
What about the background?
Exactly. So the background is very blurred, and this concrete filter that is used here doesn't detect it. The filter that is used is a canny edge detector. We will later see it's a more advanced detector where you can set a threshold for what you actually want to include in your edge detection. And here the threshold was set in a way that this gets washed out. And one person here says no eyebrows either. Yes, that's correct. This is probably too little to get recognized, but again, it's a thresholded filter. The eye looks fine. I think the hair looks largely okay. Obviously, the clothes here, that's tricky. The flower looks okay. But you also get some artificial edges or some that we wouldn't see as an edge. For example, this one here, this one comes from here. So this is in the middle of the finger. There's no actual edge in that sense on the finger, but a change of intensity because there's a lot of illumination on the right, on the left and less on the right. So This is something we may not necessarily agree with as a human or perceive it that much, but from a computational perspective here, it made sense. And we will now start building an edge detector and we wonder how it will work. And then we see if it actually works or not, and we'll contrast it to some other approaches. Um, this is more or less what I've said already, but feel free to read it later. So challenges could be the background. Blur could be a challenge. A challenge can also be that some edges are interrupted. For example, it could happen here. You see this one here is, for example, interrupted. Um, and we don't see the actual hair fully. So it's interrupted here, which is a challenge. And all of this needs to be considered when you build an edge detector because we have noise, we have blur, we have different focus. All of this can complicate the edge detection. And that's essentially what I've just said, but it's again just a summary. We have different brightness, so different illumination. We may have discontinuities in the depth, surface orientation, material properties can change, scene illumination can change. And all of this can severely complicate our edge detection. But the edge detection is one of the early steps when we want to detect more higher level features. So edge detection is in fact super important because if the edge detection doesn't work well, probably the higher level features will not work well either. So it's a non-trivial problem. Sometimes we can set thresholds that can help, but how do we set those thresholds? Which value? We may need to experiment a lot. And then if the illumination keeps changing over time, that's difficult. So when you have a controlled environment in a vision system, say an inspection system in some factory, often that's within a box, you have controlled illumination, so the illumination is the same all day long, all year long. But if you take photos in the wild, meaning in the real world, illumination keeps changing. So when I built some of my early vision systems as a student, one of the first ones I bought or I built, it actually worked in that afternoon when I coded it. And when the sun went down outside, it stopped working because I had made some assumptions about that level of illumination coming in as the sun shines through my window when I sat there as a student. And then when the sun went down, the illumination was different. And when I turned on the light at home, the illumination was different again. So I built some calibration method that initially you would click on a few in a few areas of that image where you wanted to see something, and then the system was calibrated. But when illumination changed, that calibration had to be redone. And there are a lot of such examples in the real world where simply the change of illumination can severely complicate the reliability of your vision system. And then when you're in a factory, you want a controlled environment. So I guess the stuff we get from the Cronus challenge, illumination is maybe not that much of an issue because the inspection machine is a box and they have a controlled environment. But in a real world settings or in the wild, it's different. And we will now um, build an edge detector, which is called the so-called Sobel operator. In the Sobel operator, it uses two 3x3 filters or kernels, and they will be mixed up with each other. And I will develop this now with you on the whiteboard again. So we will build the Sobel operator. And in the Sobel operator, we need these two 3 times 3 kernels. And we start with A is our source image. And we have GX and GY. Um, and these are new images, and they are, in fact, the vertical and the horizontal derivatives in the image. So they show us later how the intensity changes along X and how the intensity changes along Y, because we need these changes of intensity to find the edges. Very importantly, I've said before, matrices, therefore images, they are always bold uppercase characters. Now, I'm not very good on the iPad to write them in bold, but if you look in the slides, GX, GY, and A, they are bold because they are matrices, just the G, not the X and the Y. But you'll see that in the slides. On the iPad, I'll just write down A and G. Now, how do I calculate GX? So um, the change along X and the change along Y. I have a matrix, which is just this filter or kernel, 3 times 3. Here I put in a +1, +2, +1. I just put a plus to highlight it's not a 1, or to highlight it's a 1 or 2, but it's positive values. And we have a -1, -2, -1, and we have the zeros here. This is our operator that we apply on A, our original image, and a sign I'm just using here now is the star or a multiplication that I apply this mask to this image as before. So I apply it to the first pixel, then the second pixel, and this is always the neighborhood I apply it to build a new image, GX. And what I will get here is the change along X. So this is not, very importantly, not a matrix multiplication, because that's not, it anyway wouldn't work. It's a piecewise operation. So this sign, I apply this mask to every pixel in A to build my new output GX. Maybe just confirm that you got what this star or multiplication stands for, and that it's not a matrix multiplication, very importantly. Okay, so you got that. Then I got the change along X, so I can get the change along Y. Same scheme. I multiply, or I have this star sign with A, and I apply a matrix piecewise, and this is +1, +2, +1, -1, -2, -1, and then 0, 0, 0. So like in the first one, it gives me some change from left to right. This will give me some change from top to bottom in the neighborhood. And that's why it's a change. So G for gradient along X and the gradient along Y. And now I have change along X, change along Y. Like this, I can calculate my actual change, which is G, the actual gradient. And what I do here is I do GX squared plus GY squared, and I sum this up and take the square root. This very importantly here is the result, or the gradient. But you need to see this from an element-wise operation, because I can't just square a matrix, because GX is a matrix, so um, I can't just multiply the matrix with itself. This means element-wise. To get a pixel in G, I take the corresponding pixel in Gx and the corresponding pixel in Gy. I square each of the values, I sum them up and take the square root, and I have a single scalar value for that one pixel in G. So the question I got here in the private message is, first of all, yes, this one here we do for every single pixel. We do this for every single pixel. Then we get the image Gx and Gy. And to get our gradient G, we do this operation here again for every single pixel. And there was a question, why are the zeros in here? There's a good reason for this, because what I want is I want the change from left to right around this pixel. So there's nothing. So this is my pixel. And if I want to see how it changes from left to right, I don't need my pixel and I don't need the pixel above and below, but I put a +2 and a -2 here because I say to the left and right of the pixel, this is more important than up or down, but I still look at a bigger neighborhood than just left and right. But I don't need my actual pixel value and I don't need the pixel above and below. And it's the same concept for the GY. So I hope this answered the other private message I got here. And feel free to send the messages in public, because just having questions, there's no shame. Probably others will have the same questions as well. So this gradient here need to be calculated element-wise. And then I have G. And now I know how much change there is in a pixel, but there is one question: in which direction does that gradient go? And I want my edge, so in which direction does this edge actually go? And what I could do is, and there was a question about G, if this is a matrix. Yes, it's also a matrix, and I'm doing this operation here piecewise. Now, how do I calculate this direction in the gradient? There are a lot of functions from geometry how I can calculate that angle. And there are a lot of problems when it comes to the specific ranges of the values and all the special cases. So I need my direction, which is, I'm writing down here, the gradient's direction. I could use the A10 function, which you probably remember from your high school geometry. And I could put in so I want to calculate the angle in also a specific pixel. So also this here for a specific pixel. And I could put in I could use the A10 function. And for example, I could have, it's probably Gy divided by Gx, and I could calculate this. But this leads to a lot of trouble, and in some cases, you need to look at the specific values for it to work. So there is a function in a lot of libraries that is called the A10-2 functions. You may have seen this in some geometry function or a geometry package or some math package. Has anyone ever read the name A10-2? If so, thumbs up or thumbs down. And this A10-2 is, you can look it up on Wikipedia or in your library documentation, what it does exactly. It's not the focus of this course, but you would not pass a fraction of Gy and Gx, but rather the two individual values. And this function will look into all the special cases A10-2 and give you the right angle. So how A102 works exactly is really not important to this course. You would just look up the library or the Wikipedia article in your revision if you are curious how it works. But here, all we can say is simply we use it and we get the angle. And the angle would be, again, per pixel in our image. And, and what we got then is where the gradient goes in which direction per pixel. Now, this was lots of theory. Let's look at some examples. We have this image here, and we first convert it to a grayscale image. And now we apply the Sobel operator to it. What we get is, with the Sobel operator, we get this result here. You can take a moment to look into it, whether you agree or whether you disagree, what you think is actually helpful. So this is our edge detector. So what we want to see is changes of intensity in the original image. Do you think overall this is a good example or an example where the edge detection worked well or not? Let us know. With thumbs up means maturely positive, or thumbs down didn't work well. I think it looks quite okay. The screws get detected. We have screws here, screws there. We have this metal piece which got detected here, but yet maybe you can send in the chat or turn on your mic where you actually disagree or where you think maybe the result is not that great. What I noticed, for example, is like this metal piece here, we get actually two edges. It has to do probably with the reflection and so forth that we have the top one and the bottom one. Actually doesn't not that helpful. We also see this partially here because this has to do with the illumination. So we have less illumination here, but more to the up and down. Um, we also see here there are some scratches, in fact, on the metal. They get a lot of emphasis, these scratches, something we as humans maybe wouldn't give too much importance on, but they get a lot and change. There's a lot of change of intensity here, which amplifies this. I think even these changes here or these damages we can see better in the edge detector than if we actually just look at it. Do you have some other point where you disagree or where you think it did not work that well? The top left teeth of the shaft are not quite right. Maybe you can point me, turn on your mic where that would be exactly.
If you go left on the picture in the top left,
Here,
look more
this one?
left, and now a bit down.
Yeah.
So these teeth, yeah,
Yeah, this
yeah.
doesn't look that great. That's true. Um, let's see if no other comments so far. The pipe, which is on the right, the bottom part of it has not been highlighted. Like I guess you mean this pipe here, right? So this wouldn't be very visible. Yes, that's also true. But so far, it's just, this Sobel operator is so easy to describe, and it's actually computationally super, super easy to run. We already get something okay for our first attempt, I think. It's not perfect. There is so I've skipped a few slides. It was just the Sobel operator and how to calculate the gradient. There's a small note here about how these gradients can be computed more efficiently rather than using that 3 times 3 matrix. You can break this or you can decompose and have the product of an averaging and a differentiation kernel, but that's just for speed up. It doesn't change anything. I think here in today's explanation, it's just complicating it. It's something you would pay attention to when you implement this in a library. That's just a more efficient way. But for now, we just stick with these definitions of gx and gy, and then chi as well as the angle that I mentioned here with a tan 2. And this was the example. There's another example. So we have this image here. So maybe from some train station or bus stop where you can put your bicycle. We would get this from the Sobel operator. Um, some stuff looks okay. Some stuff is more difficult. Here, obviously, there's a lot of changes of intensity in this metal piece and looks quite complex here. Then from the edges, the lock, on the other hand, looks quite cool. As this area, it's difficult to differentiate the bicycle from the background. So, but again, okay for a very simple detector. And what we see here is also the changes along X and Y. So these two helper matrices we've calculated, GX and GY, they can also be visualized here to see changes along X and Y in case you wish. And then they are merged together with this squaring and the sum and the square root to get the gradient image. But just in case you're curious what they may look like, they are depicted here. The good thing is, there's already some code today. Um, in fact, you don't need to build all of this from scratch. What you can do is you can use an image library that is called skimage. As there is scikit-learn for machine learning, there is scikit-image. You can load different filters. Camera is an image. It's not the camera of your computer, and you will see this image in a moment. And then you can apply to your image different filters like the Sobel operator. There's also the Roberts operator and others. And you can use matplotlib for the visualization of all of this. And then it's just a little bit of boilerplate code for matplotlib to have these what are they using? They're using the subplots as well as to set titles, show images, and visualize all of this. I guess many of you have used Matplotlib before, and it's just a bit of boilerplate code that you would need to build your image. And this camera image is an image that looks like this, where there's this person using this camera. But what we see here are only the results of the Roberts edge detection and the Sobel edge detection. It's so Roberts works differently than Sobel, but again, it's a very simple one. So for this lecture, I felt since we also want to build more high-level vision systems, we don't just look into two simple operators, rather we look into one simple operator in detail. And if you want to study the other one in greater detail, you're most welcome to do this, or you just use the library here. You can also implement Sobel on your own, obviously, no problem. Or you just use the library here to visualize all of this. When we go back to the beginning of this section, we saw this girl here, as you probably remember. And this image here was generated using the Kenny edge detector. And the Kenny edge detector is more complex. We will not discuss it here in detail because you can also easily use it from a library if you wish. But and we only have half of the term, and we want to build very advanced vision systems. And Kenny Edge, you can also just use a library. What you do is you first apply a Gaussian filter to smooth the image, to remove noise, because noise is really painful. And if you have a lot of noise in there, you get a lot of unnecessary images. Then, after you've applied the Gaussian filter, This was actually not my intention. The Gaussian filter is something we have seen today as well. After you apply the Gaussian filter, you find the intensity gradients of the image. That's, for example, using the Sobel operator. So number two could be just Sobel or Roberts operator. And then you apply some more algorithms to get rid of some spurious response in edge detection, maybe some single short edges that are not connected to anything far off, that maybe only have a low intensity. Those are the ones that would get kicked out, um, especially the spurious ones. And then after you have kicked them out, you would use some threshold, maybe in terms of the intensity, to only keep high intensity potential edges. And then you try to combine some of these edges into larger edges. And that's the step number five, where you have smaller, weak edges and you try to connect them to stronger ones to build a more complex structure. One of the challenges is obviously which threshold do you use, which values do you say is really needed, and this is also what it would influence what we saw around this girl, simply because this girl, some of her hair was not visible, and some of the background was not visible. But the background was already probably quite blurred, so that's why it probably disappeared already because of step number three, because these spurious responses got kicked out. And if there were some interruptions in the hair, number five would probably combine this as large as possible. You can implement the Kenny Edge detector if you wish. Kenny Edge is applied here to our image from before. We get this response with some threshold that was priorly picked. Do you think this is better or worse than what we saw from the naive Sobel operator? I think far worse, but it depends on the threshold. So if you customize your threshold, you try to identify it, maybe you get a better response. You can also use the SK image and feature is is a package in there, and you have, or it's not a package, it's a class, I guess, or something. And there's the Kenny function, and you can use the Kenny edge detector. And here, this threshold is not a specific intensity value. Rather, it's something for the Gaussian blur. But depending on the exact implementation, you have more or less parameters. And if you check the documentation, maybe there are even more parameters. Feel free to code this and visualize it. What we see here is that's the example. We have an image that we generate, a noisy image. We have some square that is rotated, salt and pepper noise. And then for the sigma, it's the parameter used here. We apply this with sigma 1. We get a lot of noise, as you can see, far more than the rectangle or the square. We got the square, but more noise. And if we change this parameter value to 3, we actually get our square. So you can look into the library if you wish, play a little bit with this on some images of your choice, and get a better understanding of how the Kenny filter works. And from scratch today, we've built quite easy the Sobel operator. For edge detection, there are many, many more approaches. There's the Previtt operator. There are second order approaches like a Laplacian edge detector. There is edge thinning. There is the Marr-Hildreth edge operator. This is the kind of stuff you would find in some of the books I put there, especially the image processing book that are put in the recommended readings. Probably you find some on Wikipedia or other sources as well. But you can try them out, compare them, and implement some of them from scratch if you wish for further practice. And you see the Sobel operator, it already gives quite okay results for a very simple approach that we could just define and test relatively easily. Now we have finished the pixels and filters chapter. And what you saw is simply we start with pixels. Pixel images are matrices. They store intensities in a grayscale image. If we have a color image, we store 3 bytes per pixel RGB or CMY. And we've seen some filters now, how we can blur, how we can sharpen, how we can find edges. And we've already understood now a little bit how low-level vision works. Next week, we will start looking into a little bit of mid-level vision when we look at regions of images and segmentation. We see some more advanced features next week as well. In a few weeks' time, we will come back to low-level vision when we look at image sequence processing, which is an advanced topic, but there are some low-level vision tasks as well, like an optical flow or a depth. Depth is something we see in the selected topics. So we'll come back to low-level vision in the coming weeks, but next week we continue with mid-level vision, especially looking into regions of images, segmentation, and some more advanced features. Some of them probably fall into low-level vision as well. But step by step, we are advancing and getting more towards high-level vision. So in a few weeks, we can actually start to recognize objects. Are there any questions from your side? If so, send the questions now in the chat or just turn on your mic. I'll say more about the projects in a few weeks, so please don't send too many emails now about projects and marking, because all of this will become more clear in the coming weeks as we advance with the content. We'll have the lecture next week. It could be that next week the lecture starts only at 2:30. But if that's the case, I would let you know because I have a meeting before, and I'm not sure if the meeting is over at 2, but I will know this a few days in advance. So if you don't hear from me until next week, we are starting at 2 sharp, like today. If we start a little bit later, I would notify you. And I will also upload this recording to YouTube and later today create the playlist once the video has been processed and then ping you in iLearn that this playlist is now available. And I hope you got an interesting overview about the foundations of computer vision. I know it was a tough lecture today, lots of new stuff. So spend enough time on revision. And next week we'll advance with some mid-level vision and some more complex features. And have a good weekend. Bye bye.